If there are any dictators watching this, and I'd be surprised if Kim Jong isn't a fan by now, I've given him multiple shoutouts. So if you're watching Kim, be careful, because dictatorship is a dangerous game. Many before you have met a terrible end, sometimes from revolutionary mobs, but often from other aspiring dictators. Here are some dictators who met a bloody death. Between 1978 and 1992, Afghanistan was a communist country. Armed groups immediately began to rebel against the government, so in 1979 the Soviet Union intervened militarily. For 9 years they suppressed rebels but were eventually forced to withdraw. And when they did withdraw, it was only a matter of time until rebels overthrew the communist regime. By this time, Mohammad Najibullah was dictator of Afghanistan. He knew they were screwed without Soviet support, so he changed the country's constitution in 1990, making it an Islamic state and removing references to communism. But this only isolated him further. His government collapsed 2 years later and the Taliban rapidly took power. They took Kabul in 1996, where he was living. Refusing to leave the city beforehand, he was beaten and dragged behind a moving car until dead. He was then hanged from a traffic post for all to see. The Taliban now held power in Afghanistan. Between 1967 and 1989, Nicolae Ceausescu, and by the way, I just nailed that pronunciation, Nicolae Ceausescu was president of Romania. He was a rigid Stalinist and had one of the world's most brutal secret police forces. He came to be seen as a tyrant and also an incompetent leader as living standards harshly declined, and as even the Soviet Union reduced their economic and cultural ties with Romania. Ceausescu has an incredibly persuasive cult of personality, but that would only last until people realized what state Romania had fallen into. By the late 1980s, he was openly hated. So like elsewhere in Europe, there was a revolution that overthrew his dictatorship. He and his wife fled the capital as revolutionaries stormed their palace, but they were soon captured and both put on trial. After being found guilty of genocide, they were executed by firing squad immediately on taking position. It was Christmas Day 1989 and they were the last official execution in Romania. Xerxes was king of kings, which is to say king of Persia, Media, Egypt and all their collective territory. He was the most powerful man in the world. His empire was a superpower by comparison to other kingdoms. He's remembered for his construction projects, but mostly for his invasion of Greece, which saw his forces battle the Spartans at Thermopylae. The Persian side was devastated by a series of military disasters, which I imagine helped bring his bloody demise. In his mid-50s, he was assassinated by his head bodyguard and a eunuch. According to the traditional story, they then blamed the murder on his son, who was then himself murdered. But a different son discovered the conspiracy and the eunuch was soon executed. Anwar Sadat ran Egypt between 1970 and 1981 when he was assassinated. He played a senior role in Egypt's 1952 revolution, which saw the country's monarchy abolished. The king was exiled and Egypt was split into 2 countries, the other being Sudan. While other revolutionaries fought over power, Sadat hid himself in the shadows, making sure to befriend whoever did win power. He was made vice president, and when the president died, he was chosen as his successor. He wanted to be seen as a great leader, launching a war against Israel and regaining territory lost in previous wars. He then signed a peace deal with Israel for which he won the Nobel Peace Prize. This, combined with his efforts to westernize Egypt, led to his assassination. A fatwa was declared against him, and in 1981 he was shot dead by a group of assassins. With AK-47s, they shot into the crowd he was standing among until they were out of bullets. 11 others were killed also. We think of North Korea as a scary dictatorship, but there was a time when South Korea made them look soft. Between 1963 and 1979, the country was ruled as a military dictatorship. Park Chung-hee was its president, and he was just as crazy as his northern rival. He had men imprisoned for growing long hair. He ordered homeless people removed from major cities. They were sent to labor camps where many were worked to death. Those who refused to work were tortured. Human rights abuses were common under Park's regime, which is one of the reasons his friends had him murdered. Everyone around Park knew he could turn on them at any moment. So in 1979, he was shot in the head and chest by his security chief. The assassin was executed soon after, and South Korea transitioned into a democracy. In 2013, his daughter became South Korea's first female elected president, but she was later forced out of office for corruption. She is currently in jail. Some families have reputations for a reason. Maximillian Robespierre was a French revolutionary who gained power after the king was overthrown. He went into the revolution as an enlightened man, being against slavery and the death penalty. But as he gained more power, he lost more of his mind, to the point where he was just a crazy, paranoid, crazy maniac. He allowed thousands of people to be killed in the terrors, which is strange for a man who opposed the death penalty. They basically killed anyone who disagreed with them even slightly. Robespierre soon established his own religion. That's when people realized how insane he was. It was called the Cult of the Supreme Being, and people were forced to organize festivals. The arrest of Robespierre and several close allies was ordered. They attempted suicide before being arrested. Only one was successful. Robespierre shot himself in the head, but only managed to shatter his jaw. He was then executed by guillotine in an act of time-stopping irony. Samuel Doe might not have the name or the appearance of a brutal dictator. He looked like an accountant. He was a Liberian military officer who violently seized power in 1980. He murdered the previous president and immediately had countless political opponents executed. He then established a political party with which he and 14 other maniacal soldiers would run Liberia. He hated the Liberians of American descent who largely held power in the country, so he started to restructure society in favor of indigenous Liberians. But this ruined their economy, sparking a civil war that devastated Liberia. Rebels took Doe prisoner within 1 year of its outbreak. He was lured to his capture by close colleagues who wanted him out of office. He was tortured for hours, having his ears and then fingers and toes, and finally his head cut off. Ion Antonescu is the often forgotten ally of Hitler and dictator of Romania. A far-right politician, he came to power in 1940 and formed an alliance with Nazi Germany. He took part in the Holocaust and the invasion of Russia, neither of which ended well for him. He wanted a peace deal with the Allies, but before he could achieve this, he was overthrown by a coup led by the King of Romania. He was then imprisoned by the Soviets until the Romanian Communist Party could force officials into finding him guilty. He, his associates, and his wife were soon found guilty and executed by firing squad. The Romanian monarchy was abolished soon after. Mussolini was an Italian man who loved Disney. He had a pet lion called Ras, but he was also a dictator. Not a lot of people know that. In 1945, he was killed by his own people, being captured by communist partisans and shot dead without trial. His wife and close associates were afforded the same fate. Their corpses were then taken to Milan and hanged upside down at a gas station. Domitian was the 11th emperor of Rome and the last in a dynasty founded by his father. His father wasn't like other emperors. He came to power from humble beginnings as he was a pragmatist who knew how to make allies. But Domitian was different. He was an authoritarian, paying little attention to what the Senate wanted. He stripped senators of much of their power and came to be seen as a tyrant. He saw himself as a benevolent dictator who would lead Rome to a new age of enlightenment, but the nobility hated him, especially in the Senate. In 96 AD, he was assassinated by close allies, being stabbed first in the groin and 7 more times in the body.